Hello, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Live. Tonight we're going to start from a pretty well known quote: Mighty oaks from little acorns grow. And this familiar quote is attributed usually to or as being a 14th century English proverb, as well as to a lot of other people who have also said this throughout the centuries. But my favorite one of all, of course, is Winnie the Pooh. So apparently, this is a famous Winnie the Pooh quote, and we'll find out tonight that Winnie the Pooh has a good attitude, an awful lot like our plant of the day, which is a tree, the mighty oak. So I'm Allison from the Well Cultivated Life. Thank you for joining me for Flower Power, where I like to share all kinds of lore and fun tidbits about a plant each week. Now, oak trees and the acorns that they produce are probably one of my favorite things around fall. Here in New Hampshire, where I live, we get our maples and birches, which are the yellows and reds. And then later in the year, or at the end of the fall, in come these beautiful reddish bronze oaks. And they're the last trees to turn color where I live. And of course, I cannot help but gathering a whole pockets full of these little, incredibly adorable acorn caps that I make into all kinds of cute little crafting projects. So there are 58 different types of oaks in North America, and they all have different characteristics. And we think of an oak tree. This is the one that grows in my yard. I had a bunch of branches fall down in a recent storm. This is a red oak, and so we look at that, and oh yeah, that looks pretty much like an oak leaf, and it's got these deep lobes and these pointed tips on it. But as I'll show you in a minute, oak can look very different from each other. So the oak trees, the first a little lore about the probably most magical oak, which is the English oak, Quercus robur. And that has a special status as one of the triad of magical trees in the Celtic tradition, along with ash and hawthorn. And it's associated with fertility, prosperity, wisdom, strength, and protection. Now, according to the book, The Garden Witch's Herbal, the rustle of oak leaves was thought to be the whispering of the gods. And so you should listen closely because you don't know what kind of message you might get as the wind rustles through the leaves. And this sort of protective aspect of the oak tree makes it a very good tree to plant in your yard. However, the likelihood of you ever seeing an acorn grow into a mighty oak is very low because it's a very slow growing tree. So I want to show you right now. Sometimes I wait till later in the show, but I want to show you right now. This tree is in, I think it's South Carolina, and this oak is 1,500 years old, and it's just incredible. You can see how the branches are being propped up, but this is an example of a tree with a lot of endurance. And again, we see all different types of shapes of oaks, and this is typically what we think of when we see an oak tree, and there's some of the nice bronze colored foliage. And there are lots of different types of acorns as well, and we think of those generally as all being the same. But this is the white oak, which I'll tell you in a minute is like one of the most well-known oaks and most highly used for its collecting the actual acorns from it. And you can see how it's very smooth and curvy looking almost. Whereas this swamp white oak has very shallow lobes on it, and it's got this cool underside, white underside to it. The acorns look about the same. And then we get to, of course, being I'm an Oregon native, I have to bring in the Oregon white oak, which is Quercus garryana. And you can see here how very different these leaves are. They have a lot fewer lobes on them. It's much more deeply lobed. And their acorns are much more elongated. I suppose if you were a hungry squirrel, you might want one of these because those look pretty nice and big. Lots of good stuff inside of there. And then we get to the live oak, which grows in the southeastern part of the United States. And there's another variety that grows in California as well, which has these very small leaves that look even more like a holly leaf almost, with these long pointed acorns. So it's a very different look. Those are really cool. I can't remember if I've seen some of those in real life or not, but I love it. Those are really neat looking. And that smaller leaf makes it more able to, it tends to be more leathery and it's more adapted to a drier type of a climate, drier and hotter climate. And of course, the magical English oak, the classic oak after which all other oaks we think of, is the Quercus robur. And this is, we're back to this sort of smooth and undulating leaf margin. And on the left side is the oak when it is flowering. Most trees are wind pollinated, including oaks. And so this is what it looks like in the early spring when it first starts to put its flower out. And of course, we will be talking about a flower essence later on in the show. So back to acorns. These are a traditional food source for Native Americans and also for many different kinds of animals that go out and gather, squirrels and chipmunks and so on. And there are many different species, like I said, but one of the species considered the best for acorns is the white oak because it has a relatively low tannin content. And the tannins are what gives it a real kind of bitter flavor. So this is low tannin and less work to make it taste good. Now, the other traditional uses include just your typical uses for, building materials and making handles and other types of hunting implements and fuel wood, of course. And then the acorns I read can also serve as bait for fish traps, and they can be made into jewelry. Now, one of my favorite foragers, Ewell Gibbons, has this book. Usually I use his Stalking the Healthful Herbs or the Healthful Plants. But in this case, this is where his first book, he was mostly looking at foods, wild foods. And he loves acorn. And he has some preparation tips should you decide to collect some acorns this fall. Once you crack open the acorns, you're going to need to boil them in water for at least 2 hours. And you boil it until it turns brown and all the tannins come out. Then you dump off the water and you add more water and keep boiling and boiling until it is clear. And then you're going to dry the acorns in the oven and you can grind them up and make them into a meal, or if you want, or use them in any other way that you would use a regular nut. And he likes to put them with a lot of sugar. And you can tell his book came out in the 60s before we all realized that's not a very good idea. So you might want to just get a taste for them plain instead. Now, this tannin-rich water that you're boiling your acorns, you might not want to throw it out because it turns out that those tannins are the sort of beneficial and medicinal property of the plant itself. Now, normally you would collect, you're going to collect what's the easiest part, but the most potent amount of tannins can be found in the inner bark of the tree. Now, collecting the inner bark of a tree, of course, you got to be really thoughtful about how you do that because you can really damage a tree by taking off its bark. So what you can do instead is, of course, just like I said, these fell down. They've got plenty of bark here. I could basically just boil up the twigs from this. Then I don't really have to damage the whole circumference of the tree to try to collect any bark from it. Now, I probably wouldn't go out and collect a tree bark anyway. But if you did, you would want to extract that. You can make an alcohol extract of that, or you can dry it and make a decoction of it as well. Now, it's very good as an astringent. And anything that's an astringent means it has an action that works to sort of tighten up lax or kind of degraded tissues. And it's been known to be used in the intestinal tract for something like diarrhea, not for something like constipation, because when astringents also are very drying, and so it's for something that might be kind of weepy. If you had a problem with like vaginal discharge or something like that, that can also be useful as well. And it's a very sort of pure type of tannin, and it also, of course, was used for actually tanning hides as well, and one of its other uses. So it can be used as a gargle and also as a like a compress onto wounds to help stop bleeding, and um, a bunch of other stuff. Plants are just so amazing. Now, if you were out in the woods and you happen to cut yourself, you could even just grab an oak leaf and put that on there, and that can be helpful without having to do a whole lot of things. And you're not going to have to boil your oak leaf. Just throw it on there, and it will definitely help. Now, one other interesting factoid is that if you've ever, and I didn't put a picture in there, but there is a type of wasps. There are wasps that will create these galls, which is a little round ball on the oak leaf, and then they lay their eggs inside of that. And it turns out that if you collect these galls at just the right time, those two can, right level. Want the wasp babies to fly away before we collect our galls. And if you collect them at the right time, those two can be used again for helping with as an astringent and help to stop bleeding, and as a just quick, I'm out in the woods, need something quick remedy. So the next thing we're going to move into, of course, is the flower essence. And I have to read this direct quote because bachflowers.com says a person needing oak may well tell you that they don't have the time to stop and take a remedy. So an oak person has this qualities that a lot of us look up to, like determined and perseverance and superhuman endurance, and they just keep going, and they're very, very dedicated people. They're devoted to duty, and they can meet any challenge head on. But unfortunately, when people are like that and they never let themselves have any R&R, eventually that can break down. They'll tend to sacrifice for other people, do things for others, but not allow themselves to rest and recover. So what the essence does is it helps to kind of balance that out and keep a person from just going strong no matter what, and allows them to think a little bit more about balancing out their life. It also just helps you to surrender to this reality that it's okay to give yourself some slack. And by doing so, allow someone like that who's normally at work on the weekends and whatever the boss says and that sort of thing, let them have a little bit more joy into their lives. So if you know anyone, I think someone watching right now could maybe use a little bit of oak flower essence. Now, let's get on to our card. And these are this is from the Herb Crafter's Tarot, and it's the 7 of Earth. And the 7 cards are called visionary trees. They are very important trees in the ecosystem. They're sort of like the parent trees. Oaks in ecology are what's called the successionally, they're the kind of final tree that grows in to create the oak forest, whereas other trees that now are died out, and that's kind of the primary forest. And then they also are nurse trees. When they fall over, other plants they start to decompose, and other plants can grow in them and use their minerals that they have as a resource. And they are the type of trees, like I was saying earlier, you plant this and you're not going to see it become a tree. It's the type of tree that we plant for our ancestors. So the words on the card say, live by the rhythms of the earth, work slowly and steadily towards your goal, plant for the generations to come. So this idea of really working with the rhythms of nature, and that this is key to really understanding how we work. The card says your legacy is intertwined with the moss and trees. You know, these oaks are slow growing, and they're like the sentinels almost of our land. And we can work hard, we can gather our rewards, but we also have to think about what how the fruits of our labor are going to move and be important for the next generations. And this is very similar to the sort of Native American um, idea of 7 generations, right? We plant an oak tree and it's around for at least 7 generations. So it takes a long time and a commitment to grow an oak, which includes patience and trust and all of those things that come with uh, time. And so this is about paying things forward, knowing that it's not going to be really affect our lives, but maybe just a small thing can make a difference in the lives of future generations. So if we're constantly worried about what's going on right now, and we don't have this kind of long-term view, we're not going to plant an acorn, and then we're not going to be able to have this impact towards people that may not even have be born yet. So the question for this week is, what is your big vision for the future? Like, what would you just love to leave, not really as a legacy, but how can you make things better now so that it will last into the future? And are you planting your acorns and seeds for that now? So that's our message from Oak tonight. Thank you so much for joining me for another Flower Power. And if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps a lot. So have a great night, everybody. Take care.